What's up, guys? Four-wheeler doctor back again, working on a little dirt bike. I don't know how I got tied up working on these dirt bikes, but had a few of them come in here lately, like that one and that one over there, and I got one more that's actually mine I need to fix. But anyway, I'm gonna have to change my name to the dirt bike doctor, I reckon. But we're putting back this RM 85. Y'all might have watched my video. It's been a while ago since I touched this thing, but I finally got in all the parts and finally got all the stuff out of the way that was ahead of it. So this thing ended up having a spun rod bearing. This is actually the new crank. We're gonna put a crank in there. Just got a new ring for it. It's only one ring on this thing. So we're gonna put that on and just run a hone through that cylinder just to clean it up some. So start off with, I pressed the old crank out of here. We need to push the new one back in. So that's what I'm going to be working on tonight. I'm going to start off by lubing this thing up. I may actually put a little bit of I don't know, this oil will probably be good. I was about to say put some grease on it so it doesn't flip that seal out in there, because that seal's very important on a two-stroke engine. Keeps your engine oiled up and pressure, and I just can't explain all of it to you tonight, but it's important. So I'll just keep a close eye on that when we start pressing this thing back in. I'm going to probably grab the nut that goes on here just to run it on there to make sure we don't mess these threads up, and then a socket that will fit right on the very end of this crankshaft so we can press it back in. I'm gonna get this thing rigged up in the press and I'll show you how it goes. Alright guys, this is my little setup in the press here. This thing just will fit between the plates and fit between my my support here. Got an 11mm socket, which is the same size socket that I used to press the old one out. This thing didn't have a whole lot of pressure on it coming out. And as you can see, it doesn't have a whole lot going back in either. So just press it down till it stops. Make sure your rod here doesn't contact your sides, because it will never go in if the rod hits, and you could possibly bend your rod, so don't want to do that. Alright, so that's pretty much it. It's pressed in there now. Flip this thing around. Now we'll check the seal on the back side to make sure it didn't flip out. Not flip out like your crazy ex-girlfriend, flip out like these seals sometimes do. And no, it didn't. So it looks good. Thing's pressed all the way down. You can see there's barely any gap in the side there. Got smooth rotation except for the rod overextending, because I can't hold it in the very center. But that's it, pressed in. Alright, so next thing we're going to need to put in here is going to be our transmission. Also, I'd like to show you this old crank here. It was kind of seized up when I took it off, but I got it freed up. You can see the bearings are just gone in it. That can happen a few different ways. The biggest thing is not getting your oil and your gas or your oil mixed correctly in your gas will make these things spin a rod bearing in a heartbeat. So I'm not saying that's what happened in this case, but that's what it's leaning toward. Alright, let me grab my box that's got the transmission parts in it, get all that stuff laid out, and I'll cut the camera back on in a second. Alright guys, got everything, well, most everything laid out here. Hopefully I can remember how to put this thing back together. I don't want to be putting it in first and it go backwards or anything. So I'm going to put a little bit of oil on the end of this shaft here. This is actually the one that the chain goes on, so it'll go through this hole here. Sticks out the other side, like I say, where the chain is. This thing was pretty stuck on here when we removed everything, so I'm not sure how easy it's going to slide back in. We may have to coax it with a few taps from the hammer, but it didn't really want to come out, and actually it's going in about as easy as it came out. It didn't take much to knock it out before, and it doesn't take much to knock it back in. So next one to go in will be this front set of gears. They do have a washer on the back side here. This one does have a washer here too, so slide this thing in here. Hopefully I can get it to slide back behind all these other gears. Pretty sure that's how I removed it, so in all actuality it should go back that way, but you know, sometimes stuff don't work out like that. Look at there, all the stars are lined up today and it worked, so it's in there. It's probably not going to spin very good because there's no telling what gear it's in. Without the shift forks in there, they all the gears will just mesh together, and like I say, there's no telling what gear it's in. Okay, so now we're gonna see about putting these forks in there. I'm pretty sure this fork here goes in this front side. The real thing to check with those forks is the pin needs to face your shift drum. Shift drum goes in this hole here, so just make sure all your pins face the shift drum, and that's pretty much how you can figure out where it goes. These two forks here, this one had something wrote on it, but I can't hardly read it. It looks like it had a 1 on it. This one's got a 2. These are how they came out, so naturally they won't go in this way and still connect to the shift drum, so you have to flip them over. They have to go in this way. So slide it in here to one of your little collars that they rest on. May have to pick up on the little collar to get it to fit in there right. This one goes on the second collar that's available. We'll leave this shaft out for right now. Makes it a little easier to get the shift drum in with the shaft out of it. So now you slide your shift drum in here into this bearing. Goes in little to no resistance. Zoom in on the camera a little bit so y'all might can halfway see what's going on. Okay, so now lift up on this shift drum to get it in a groove. Put the shaft through there. Do the same thing with the other two forks. I said lift up on the shift drum. That ain't what I didn't lift up on the shift drum. That was lifted up on the fork. So lift up on this bottom fork. See if we can get it to spin around here and catch in that very bottom groove, and then this one goes in the very top groove. Slide your shaft through. Sometimes you have to tap these shafts once they get down to the crankcase, just to make sure they bottom out. So there you go. Got the transmission in this thing. So next we need to put our gasket on. And I may end up having to put this thing back in the press to press it back together. If you hadn't checked my other video out, I probably left a link to it like up in this corner at the very first of this video. So go check it out if you hadn't. I'll put another link up in this corner. And it was very tough to get the crankcase apart. I had a few people chime in on my comments and say I needed a crankcase separator. I looked into that, and that would have made it easier, but I don't work on many of these things, so that is one of the few tools I don't have. So the old screwdriver and about 20 minutes of praying that I didn't mess the crankcase up is how we got it apart. And I don't know if I was lucky or if I was good, but we didn't mess the crankcase up. So but if you are doing this, watching this video just to see if you can tear yours apart, one of those crankcase separators would make the job a little easier. Actually, more than a little easier, a lot easier. So it looks like I'm gonna have to get out the blowtorch to get into this gasket set. So let me cut the camera off because I don't want to bore you with my commentary, and I'll cut it back on in a sec. Alright, finally got the gasket out of the wrapper, which was not the easiest thing I've ever done. But got this case cleaned up for the other side. I lubed up all the shafts here to try to make this thing a little easier to go back in. Still not, I'm not real confident in it going together smoothly. because of the time I had getting it apart. But we're going to give it a shot. Fingers crossed. Slide it on down on your transmission shaft first, your crankshaft second, and just going to put a little bit of pressure on it, squeeze it, kind of rock it down. Yeah, it feels like it's getting hung up pretty good on the crankshaft there. There's nothing over here to really hang it, so it about has to be too much resistance on the bearing going on the crankshaft. So what I'm going to do is rig this thing up into press, get me a big old socket, go around this area right here and press it down on there. It's the only way I know to get it back together, because Lord, I needed a press to get it apart. So let me rig it up in the press and we'll see what we can do. Alright guys, here's what we got. I got an 1 3/8 inch socket that actually hits the case. It doesn't hit that seal. I probably should have moved my support up a little bit, because I'm about to run out of throw on my jack here, but we'll see if we can press it down a little bit. See, it's actually going down there fairly smooth. Biggest thing to check here, when you get down to where your shift drum lines up, you need to make sure it's going through your hole, as well as your rod. Don't want the rod to be kicked out so far that it gets pinched between the two cases, because that can happen. So I'm going to press this thing down slowly, thinking I'm going to end up hitting that shift drum here in a second, because it doesn't look like it's, yeah, it kicked up just a little bit just now because our shift drum's not quite lined up. Let me see if I can back some pressure off and maybe grab me a screwdriver to line that shift drum up real quick. Okay, so scoot the shift drum over just a little bit. Oh yeah, it's got a lot of wobble in it. Still check your rod, it's good. Well, I don't think the shift drum is what's holding it. Take my brass hammer and tap this side over here. Tell you what it could be is it could be the shafts that the shift forks are on. They may not be completely lined up, but actually there's holes through here where you can see those too. And then it actually does look like they're lined up. So I'm not sure, unless, I think I know what's going on. So we put it in there. I believe our shaft that the chain goes on is hitting my support here, my press plate. I don't really know the proper term. It's got some weird name for it, but the plate that I'm pressing on. So I'm going to scoot this thing around and see if I can get it to maybe get where I can press on that side a little bit. There it goes. That's exactly what it was. That plate wasn't in there quite right. And you can still see your gasket still in there good. I did have it lined up on those dowels that are there. Just like that. I got a pretty good idea that if we would have had the proper tool to separate this case, that it would have come apart just as easily as it would have went back together here. But there again, I didn't have the right tool, so we had to improvise, and it ended up taking a little bit of time. So there you go. Got that put together. Case is pressed together there. Get back over here on the workbench. We'll see if we can stick some screws in this thing. Cut the camera back on in a sec. Alright guys, I said screws, but I meant bolts. This is a good time where the cardboard comes in handy. Keeps up with all your bolts and I even punch them in here in the somewhat same arrangement that they came out. So it makes putting them back together 50 times easier than trying to find one in a bucket and sticking it in there and see if it goes. So that's what I've always done, and it works good. So alright, so let me stick these bolts in here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 of them, and we will get them tightened up and cut the camera back on the next step. Alright guys, next thing we're going to put in there is this little funny looking, it's a star looking piece, and this weird looking little bolt. I don't know if it calls for it in the manual or not, but I've had these back out on some ATVs, so I always put some Loctite on here to keep it from backing out. I don't know if it's the vibration from the engine or what it is, but I've had them come out of ATVs before and do crazy stuff. There's a little notch in the bottom of this thing. I don't know if you can see that or not. There's a notch right there, and it has to line up with that pin that's on the end of the shift shaft. So, or shift drum, I'm sorry. So let me see if I can get it. There's a mark right there on it that tells you where that notch is. We'll see if we can get that thing to press in there all the way, set all the way down on it, and it did. You want to make sure it gets all the way in there and sits down flush, or your shifting won't work quite right. So run this thing down a little bit. That's 12 millimeter. It spins around until it gets into some sort of gear where it stops. Normally I like to torque these things down. That size bolt usually goes for about 25 Newton meters, or about 20 foot-pounds. So we're going to hit this one too. There you go. Also torque down all the crankcase bolts, just because I don't want to leave one loose somewhere. Pull your screwdriver back out so that drum will, or that arm will lay back down on it. Then you can rotate this thing back around. See how that's how it's shifting gears right there. Shifting pretty easy. I'm not sure which gear or which way the gears do on these, because I haven't done one of these in a long time. Alright, next thing to go in is going to be this funny little thing with the little arms and the pins and the springs and all that stuff. That's why we got this zip tie on here to hold all that together, because you don't want it to come apart. I know it meshes up with this, so I need to figure out which way it needs to go. See, if this fits in there like that, then this thing will need to go in here like this, just like that. And then this will, I don't know if this will go on next or not, because I believe this retainer has to go on there now, like this, just like that. And then the two bolts to go in, or screws to go in it. We boogered the head up on one of these. Other one's still good. I guess I'm gonna put a dab of Loctite on them as well, because it had Loctite on it prior. Although they were very tough to get off. I heated them, all kind of stuff. Check my other video out and you can see me struggle. Actually, that was one of the biggest struggling videos I've ever done on anything I work on. I was struggling left and right with it, but as is my life. So I might look around and see if I can find a screw that looks like I got a better head than this one before I put this back together. So let me see what I can find, and I'll cut the camera back on in a sec. I couldn't find another screw, but luckily the way this thing stripped out, it stripped in the reverse side, because that's when it stripped when I was taking it out, so it'll actually tighten back up in there. So I threw some Loctite on it, put it back in there. We're going to slide this shaft on down, just like that. I don't know if that's going to stay up in there while I put all this other stuff on, because it actually hits and tries to push itself out. So you at least get the idea. There's a spring in here that has to go on this pin, so make sure that gets lined up. Alright, next thing we need to stick on, excuse me there camera, is the gear that goes on the end of the crankshaft. I don't have something to cut this zip tie with, Alright, bear with me just a sec. Alright, so this is what we got. Has a spacer. Put a little bit of oil on this because there is a seal there. Make sure it slides down in there good and doesn't mess your seal up. Kind of rotate it as you push it in. That'll keep your seal from getting messed up. Alright, and then this gear part goes on next. Just slides right on there over the splines. Then you got a washer. Then you got a nut. This nut is reverse thread, so turn it to your right to, turn it to your left to tighten it up. I was telling you how to do it and turned it the wrong way. Alright, so we'll need to tighten that thing down. And then the very last thing to go in there is this little power valve. I don't really know what this is called, controller or something, I don't know. But there's a slot here that this little pin has to line up on. So just make sure you play with your little arm there until you get it lined up in it. And it's just like that. These things don't really have to line up on anything because that rotates with the engine. So hit this thing with the ratchet to get it tightened up. And then we may put I guess we could put the clutch on it next. That'll be our next item. So I'll grab the clutches out and we'll stick them on next. Cut the camera back on in a sec. Alright guys, now we're back over here getting these last few gears on before we put the clutch in. Next gear we need to put in is this one here for your kickstart. It does have a washer on the back side. Make sure all that goes down. It just slides right on that shaft. And then we've got this gear here. Has a little step that goes down. It does have a washer on it as well. It slides on this little shaft here. Kind of something like this. Got to get it on there square and line your teeth up. And it does have a snap ring on it, so make sure you put your snap ring back in. Get that stuck in there real quick. Slide it down, see if I can get it to snap into the groove. Actually, I think my snap ring might be upside down. I don't really know if that makes a difference or not, but there's a shiny side and a dull side. The dull side, in this case, the way it come off was actually on the outside. So there we go, got it in there. I do like to rotate those just to make sure they get in the groove. So that's in there. Now I believe our clutch is our next part to go in. I did tighten this nut up a while ago before I put all this back together. But our clutch has this washer that goes on here next. Slides down over the shaft. I'm going to pull the basket out of here because we got to get all this stuff lined up on the inside. Actually, I'm going to pull the whole inside out of here. Just like that. And it's got that funny looking washer. I think we had some issues getting that apart when we took the engine apart. And it does have a roller bearing in there. Make sure it goes back in as well. So slide that down, rotate it around a little bit to get it lined up on your teeth. There you go. Put your washer on there over all of your teeth there. And the next piece to go on will be the clutch discs. Slide it down over your teeth. You really got to get a lot of stuff lined up here to get all this to go in. The clutch discs go in the little basket there, and you have to line that center portion up with the splines on that shaft. Let me see if I can halfway eyeball it to get it to where it's going to line up. Yeah, to rotate it back a little bit. It's bad close. Just like that. Slides down on there, and your clutch disc goes down on there like that. And the next piece you need to put on will be this washer. Slide it on like that, and then this nut. Tighten it up. I'm going to probably just hit it with the impact. I believe this is a 19mm. And it is normal thread, so pretty sure it's normal thread. Hold on. Yeah, it's normal thread. So tighten that up and fold one of these ears down on that nut to keep it from backing off. You're going to be ready to put your pressure plate on. I'll cut the camera back on once I get everything tightened up. Alright guys, now we got this center bolt tightened up and the washer on there. We're going to put this plate back on. It just slides back on there like this. Then you need to grab your bolts and springs to put back in it. One thing you need to look at on this, which I've run into this with four-wheelers, and actually this one's doing it right now, is to make sure that that pressure plate sits down on that top friction material. It doesn't. So rock it around until you get it to where it's set down on there all the way, and that way when you tighten up the springs on here, that everything will be tight. You shouldn't be able to wiggle these friction plates around once you get the springs tightened up. So let me stick all these in here. This is just pretty redundant process here. Just stick your spring in that doesn't have a top or a bottom or anything, and start your bolt in there, and then tighten these down pretty even, jump around, and I believe these will go down to about the same thing that our case bolts go to, about the 10 Newton meters or 7 foot-pounds or something like that. So we'll get these eased down, and I'll cut the camera back on the next step. Alright guys, the torque spec on these bolts is like 3 foot-pounds or 44 inch-pounds or something like that, so the it's not quite as tight as the ones that we do around the outside here. But I've got this cover ready to go back on. This is actually a different cover because the little clutch lever was broke off the other one, as I think happens on a lot of times on these bikes. So just want to make sure your 2 dowels are in here, one here and one here, and get your new gasket, slide it on. I'm probably not going to put any RTV or anything on this gasket either, because these get taken off from time to time for replacing clutches and all that, and we'll just try to keep the next person from having to replace the gasket. So now what we want to do is, one thing, try to halfway line this shaft here up with the shaft here for our water pump, so that when we put this all together, it'll all slide together. So we'll put it at about the 12 o'clock position there, about right there, and line this shaft up too. This still might not work, but we at least tried. Alright, and then the next thing we need to do is make sure this thing's oriented in the right position. This is the clutch puller, I guess you want to call it, and it's got to line up in this hole here with the teeth in there sliding down this shaft as you slide it on there. That's actually what engages your clutch. So when it goes on like this, your teeth are on the front side of this shaft, so it should be in this position here. So we're going to see if we can get it to slide in there when we get it all together. Also, the last thing we need to do is make sure our shift shaft here is slid all the way in and lined up with our shift drum here. And I can't get it on there right now, but let me get it lined up. I'll cut the camera back on in a sec. Alright guys, that little shift drum there got kicked out a little bit, and it actually wouldn't slide back in there behind that clutch. So I had to rotate the shift drum down just a hair and get this shaft to slide back over it. And you just want to make sure it's in the center. It looks like you got 5 notches on the shift drum portion, so make sure that your center notch is lined up with your center notch of your shifter there, and so that will let it shift, go the full direction back and forth. So that should be good. And now we're going to see if we can slide this cover on. Again, make sure this is rotated in close to the right direction, and then just slide your cover on here. Got a lot of stuff we've got to line up, so hopefully this will all work out. Rotate that little clutch lever just a little bit, and that'll help it sit down on there. And what I've seen it do in the past too is that I'm going to rotate the water pump too. That's actually all it took. It dropped all the way down on there. So that should be good. We will stick the remaining bolts we got around this cover, and I'll go ahead and stick this water pump cover on here too, and then we will probably jump to the other side and get the flywheel on, or the whatever you call it on these two-stroke bikes, but the stator and all that, and then we will stick the cylinder on. So let me get all these bolts tightened up, we'll flip to the other side. Alright guys, before we jump over to the other side, I'm going to go ahead and install the reed valves in there. Just going to put it all in as one piece. I'm thinking this is the direction it goes in. Shoot, I'm not real sure. I think it does go this direction. Yeah, it don't fit in there right the other way. So stick the bolts in there, tighten that up, and then we'll jump to the stator side. Alright, we're over here on the stator side now. First thing we need to do, since this is a new crankshaft, is put this Woodruff key back in the crank. Came out of the old one. Kind of get it lined up halfway in your slot there. Tap it down with a hammer. Sometimes these things can be tough to get to go in there all the way. That doesn't look like this. It doesn't look like this is going to be one of those times. So get it started down in there, and then we are going to stick our little. I'm gonna call this a flywheel. That's probably not the correct term for it, but that's what we're going with. Stick it on there. There's a tapered end to it, and then the end, I guess a fat end and a small end. The small end needs to be facing the outside. You just line that up on your little Woodruff key there, and then there's a nut that goes on it. It's a normal thread too. I believe that's about a 14mm. We'll torque that down in a minute. Then we're going to stick our, there again, not real sure of the proper term. These are called stators on four-wheelers, so that's what we're going to call it here. Stick the stator on. It's magnetized, so it kind of have to push it down on there. Stick your wire out the side. I did mark the location of this thing when I took it off, just making sure we got our timing close to right to put it back together. And those marks are still there, so we'll line those marks up and stick these two 8mm bolts in there, or 8mm headed bolts, and get those tightened up. I'm not going to be able to do that one without a socket. So here we go. I may actually stick some Loctite on those things, because from time to time they tend to back out, especially in four-wheelers. So let me get this tightened up, those two bolts tightened up, and also while we're here, may as well go ahead and stick on the sprocket for the chain. It is just slides over this rear shaft here, and it has a snap ring that goes on it. So slides over just like that, and then this snap ring here snaps on the outside, holds everything together. This snap ring has got some super small holes in it. I'm not sure if my snap ring pliers are even going to work here. So what you do is you get another set of snap ring pliers that will work. There you go. Slide that on there. There again, rotate it, make sure it's in the right location. Alright guys, that's about it on this side. I'm going to stick the cover on with the 4 bolts, and then we will jump on the top end. So let me get all this stuff tightened up. I'll cut the camera back on in a second. Guys, I hit the button, but for some reason this thing just took a picture. Well, I'm going to run back through with what I did. This piston needs to go on there with this dent toward the front, toward the exhaust. This is the old piston. I just cleaned it up a little bit. Really didn't have any problems with the piston. Actually, it was the bottom end that was an issue. Just push this rod actually had a needle bearing. I can show you the old one that came out, but it had a needle bearing that came with it. So we put the new needle bearing in, and then push your piston pin through there. And then there's a snap ring that holds on the outside. Shove you some rags in there so you don't lose your snap ring down your crankcase, and just pry that ring in and work your way around on it. I usually just start with the bottom of it. Just always keep one finger on that ring, because those things will go flying on you. And it's in there now. Like I said, I'm sorry you didn't get to see that, but I took a picture of it, but it just doesn't the same as the video. So next thing we're going to do is stick a ring in it. This engine here only has one piston ring, so I ordered a replacement. Hopefully this is going to be the right size. The way this thing works is there's actually a little pin. See if you can see that right there. A little pin in there that you have to line up with the end of this ring. The ring actually's got a notch in it, and that needs to line up over the pin. So just stretch this ring out just a little bit over the piston. The ring also has an N stamped in it. The numbers on these things always go up. So the end facing up, stretch your ring over it a little, work your way around, and there you go, it's on there. So if you keep your gap over top of that little pin, everything will work out when you go to put it back together. Alright, next thing we need to do is put our cylinder on. I've already I honed this thing, cleaned it out with some transmission fluid. Just works real good for cleaning cylinders out. Got another gasket on the bottom end, and we're going to see if we can slide this thing over here. There are 2 dowel pins here on the, this will be on the left side of the engine. You need to feed your power valve arm up through here. Before you squeeze this stuff together, make sure that your gap is over that little pin, and this should slide right in there fairly easily. It did. And now we've got to get our power valve arm in there, kind of rock it back a little bit. There we go. Slide right down just like that. There you go. Now your cylinder's on. So grab the bolts to bolt the bottom of the cylinder down and get those tightened up. I don't know, I'm not real sure what the torque spec is on them. I'll probably guess around 25 Newton meters or something like that. And then we will get our power valve hooked up and bolt our head on, and it's going to be pretty close to being it. The bolts or the nuts for the cylinder are these ones with the flange on them. They don't have a washer on them. It seems like the top ones are the ones that have a washer. Just about lost the motor there. So get these tightened down, and I'll cut the camera back on right before I get started with the power valve. Don't forget this one inside here where the power valve is. So I'll cut the camera back on in a sec. Alright guys, I'm going to go ahead and bolt this head on before I do the power valve. Cleaned the making safe surface up on the head real good. It's got a fairly new spark plug in it. I was wrong on the torque on these things. It's like 18 foot-pounds. The torque on the actual head here is 20 foot-pounds. Make sure you put your copper gaskets, washers, I'm sorry, on here before you put your nuts on. And then put the nuts on there, and like I said, torque it down to 20 foot-pounds. And I will get those torqued down, cut the camera back on when I get the power valve tied up. Alright guys, last thing to do is get this power valve lined up in here. There's a notch on this arm, and it lines right up with that shaft. Mine lined up just perfect. So put that on there, then tighten your bolt up. Well, this is kind of a screw, I guess. And see if I can go back down about our number, our same thing, our 4 foot-pounds or whatever. And then the last remaining things to stick on is that front cover to cover up the power valve stuff, and this side cover here. So those are all we got left to do. I'm gonna get those stuck on there, and hopefully the next part of the video you see will be me cranking this thing up. So I gotta get the bike back over here and get it put back on, which doesn't take very long, and I'll cut the camera back on when we try to crank it. So see you in a little bit. Alright guys, this is probably not going to be one of my best videos, but I just wanted to show this dirt bike up and running. I've already ridden it around a couple times, but just wanted to show you guys that it will work. It actually shifts very, very smooth. Just a little surprising, but let's see if we can get it to bust off here. Cut the choke on, cut the gas on, choke, gas. Last time I crunked it, it fired right up pretty easy. I hate a kickstart, by the way. You can't tell that already. There you go, just like that. like a champ. Runs pretty dang good too. So that's gonna be it for this one. Y'all check out the other videos. Hit the like button, subscribe. Y'all have a good night.